Now, Mr. President, I'm also here today to make a UC request for the Senate to consider my legislation, the Banning Unlawful Machine Gun Parts, or BUMP Act. Nearly 7 years ago, on October the 1st of 2017, more than 20,000 people gathered for a large outdoor music festival. It was the third day in a row that folks from all around the country joined their friends and family to hear music from some of their favorite musicians. And no one could have anticipated the nightmare that was about to unfold that day. Just after 10 o'clock at night, thousands were listening to the final performance of the night, and then over the music, they started to hear what at first people thought were fireworks. Rapid gunfire rained down on the crowd, with shots so close together that they seemed to almost bleed into each other. Complete panic erupted. And for the next terrifying 10 minutes, concert goers ran in every direction, searching for cover where there was none. Some falling down next to bleeding friends and dying loved ones. Others fleeing, desperately trying to reach safety. In total, the shooter fired more than 1,000 rounds of ammunition in just 10 minutes. He killed 58 people that night, injured hundreds more, including 2 more who had ultimately perished from their wounds. It was and is the deadliest mass shooting in American history. The Las Vegas gunman was able to murder and injure so many people so quickly because he used a deadly device known as a bump stock. Bump stocks are an attachment that modifies semi-automatic firearms to dramatically increase their rate of fire, allowing them to operate as fully automatic weapons. They make it possible to shoot hundreds of rounds a minute. And let me be real clear, as a firearms owner myself, there's no legitimate use for a bump stock. Not for self-defense, not in a law enforcement context, not even in military applications, as they're less accurate than a standard fully automatic military platform. But what they are tailor-made for is a mass shooting. Now, I know there are people who will say guns don't kill people, people kill people. But the reality is this: bump stocks kill and injure in the hundreds. As someone who has owned and used firearms for most of my life, for hunting, for sport, for self-defense, I know for a fact that bump stocks serve no legitimate purpose. And that's why in the days and weeks that followed the horrific mass shooting in Las Vegas, Nevada, I led a bipartisan effort to ban bump stocks. I introduced legislation in the Senate alongside my Republican colleague and friend Jeff Flake of Arizona, and Nevada's Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. We also called on then-President Trump to use his authority to ban bump stocks in a federal rule. Now, President Trump actually agreed with us at the time and finalized an ATF rule to get that done. But last week, our wildly out-of-touch Supreme Court majority invalidated that rule. In an illogical and deadly ruling, they made bump stocks legal once again. Now, as Justice Sotomayor said in her dissent, when I see a bird that walks like a duck, swims like a duck, quacks like a duck, I call that bird a duck. I agree with Justice Sotomayor. A bump stock equipped semi-automatic rifle is a machine gun. And it should be banned just like machine guns have been banned for nearly 100 years. Now, even still, within the Supreme Court's majority's ruling, they gave Congress, they gave us clear direction on the only way for us to protect Americans from these deadly devices. Congress needs to act. We need to pass my bill to ban bump stocks and do it now. And I am proud to lead the Banning Unlawful Machine Gun Parts, or BUMP Act, alongside senators like Catherine Cortez Masto, Susan Collins, Angus King, and the more than 20 new co-sponsors who joined our legislation after the Supreme Court's recent ruling. This is the same bipartisan bill that I first introduced in 2018 in the aftermath of that shooting. The Bump Act would prohibit the sale of bump stocks and other devices that allow semi-automatic firearms to increase their rate of fire and operate as fully automatic weapons. This is something that nearly all Americans agree should be done. This should be a common sense, bipartisan public safety vote that all of us should welcome if we believe that our kids should have the freedom to feel safe in their church or their classroom or their movie theater. We should also be clear about what happens if we don't pass this legislation. We will be giving a free pass to street gangs and cartels and mass shooters to access these deadly devices and turn them against our communities. That's the harm that we're putting our communities in. There's some skepticism out there about whether Congress can get this done, about whether all of us coming together to ban bump stocks is impossible. But 2 years ago, we proved that type of thinking is flat wrong. Over my time here in the Senate, I have learned that people are always quick to tell you there's no path forward for your legislation. And the reality is that there is never a path forward until we collectively choose to make one. I was proud to be part of the core group of bipartisan negotiators here in the Senate that helped pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That was the first significant federal gun safety legislation signed into law in nearly 3 decades. And during those negotiations, I worked especially close with my colleague, Senator Collins, on a successful effort to increase criminal penalties for those who would put guns into the hands of criminals and to make it illegal to traffic firearms out of our country. And by passing that law, we proved that Congress can take concrete action to protect our communities from gun violence. Now, Mr. President, now it's time that we take similar bipartisan action to ban these bump stocks. And for my part, I refuse to stand idly by and wait for the next mass shooting. So I would ask all of my colleagues to please support the Bump Act, to ban these deadly mass killing devices once and for all.
For these reasons, Mr. President, therefore, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Senator from New Mexico.
I just want to remind our colleagues that we actually did pass legislation 2 years ago to invest in mental health. And we passed a meaningful gun safety piece of legislation. But the assertion that this would ban some enormous number of firearm devices is certainly not rooted in fact. It would, however, ban bump stocks, and it would ban things like Glock switches, which also let semi-automatic firearms act as fully automatic firearms. Mr. President, I think the American people understand what common sense gun safety looks like, and that's what the Bump Act is all about. I will reserve the rest of my time, but this will not be the last time you hear about these devices on the floor of the Senate.